Nag-Facebook ka ba? Wag na. O, pwede rin, pero kung hindi, wag na. Good evening, everyone. Welcome again to another live streaming of tax training. And tonight, I will discuss to you the deductions, no? The itemized deductions, the allowable deductions. No? As we have discussed last time, no? The contribution, we stop on the contributions or gifts. No? So tonight, we will discuss about the research and development. No? These are the itemized deductions allowed for those taxpayers who opted to claim itemized deduction as their deductions against their income tax income to arrive at their net taxable income. No? So I would like to shout out tayo. Sino yung mga nandyan na?
Wala pa pong nagko-comment mo, pero may viewer na po na 9.
Okay. So, shout out po tayo sa ating mga YouTubers. Thank you very much for your subscription. Umabot na po tayo ng 5,950 subscribers. No? Thank you very much. The purpose of our channel is for you to have a better tax compliance. Okay, so let's continue with our discussion on the itemized deductions and tonight about research and development. What is this research and development? No? So, a taxpayer may treat research or development expenditures which are paid or incurred by him during the taxable year in connection with his trade, business, or profession as ordinary and necessary expenses which are not chargeable to capital account. No? So, at the option of that taxpayer, the legitimate research and development can be charged to the expenses, no, during the taxable year. So the expenditure so treated shall be allowed as deduction during the taxable year when paid or incurred. No? But of course, there are times that the research and development will be charged to capital account, especially if the purpose of the research and development is to develop new product or have the project, no? To have a project. So in that case, that should be capitalized to the cost of the project and not charged to the expenses or the operations. But if the research and development is for in connection with the trade or business or profession of the taxpayer, then that's that time it is treated as ordinary and necessary expenses chargeable to income, no, and as a legitimate income deductions. Amortization of certain research and development expenditures. So there are times that if research and development are capitalized, no, and during the taxable year, the amount that pertains to the year charged to the operation during the year are called amortization. No? So amortize the cost of research and development. At the election of the taxpayer and in accordance with the rules and regulations to be prescribed by the Secretary of Finance upon recommendation of the Commissioner, the following research and development expenditures may be treated as deferred expenses. So these are deferred expenses. The research and development cannot be charged against the income during the taxable year. No? Letter A, if they are paid or incurred by the taxpayer in connection with his trade, business, or profession. No? Not treated as expense under paragraph 1 thereof, or chargeable to capital account but not chargeable to property of a character which is subject to depreciation or depletion. No? So, meron na? Shout out?
Ma'am, shout out ma'am.
Sige.
Si Ma'am Maria Eden Fuentes.
Okay, so shout out to Ma'am Maria Eden Fuentes.
Si Sir Christian Kakayan.
Christian Kakayan, no? Shout out also.
Kasi
Good evening po.
Ma'am Julian Principe.
Okay, so shout out also to Ma'am Julian Principe.
Tapos si Ma'am Alessandra Resio.
Okay, shout out also to Ma'am Alisanda Ricio. Good evening po sa inyong lahat. And thank you for watching. No? Okay, so we will discuss the itemized deductions, but of course we will entertain also questions, no? Even if it is not related to income, we will answer your questions or your queries. You just type in the comment section and we will try our best to answer your questions, no? Okay, so in computing taxable income, such deferred expenses shall be allowed as deduction ratably distributed over a period of not less than 60 months. So 60 months period is 5 years, no? So that amortization of this deferred research and development should be amortized within 6 months or 5 years, as may be elected by the taxpayer, beginning with the month in which the taxpayer first realizes benefits from such expenditures. No? Kailan siya mag-start? At the beginning of the month where the taxpayer realizes benefits, no, from that research and development. Okay, so the election provided by paragraph 2 may be made for any taxable year beginning after the effectivity of this code, but only if made not later than the time prescribed by law for filing the return for such taxable year. So when is that? April 15, no? The method so elected and the period selected by the taxpayer shall be adhered to. So what is the period elected? The maximum is 60 months or 5 years. In computing taxable income for the taxable year for which the election is made and for all subsequent taxable years, unless with the approval of the commissioner, a change to a different method is authorized with respect to a part or all of such expenditures, the election shall not apply to any expenditure paid or incurred during any taxable year for which the taxpayer makes the election. No? So, yung election whether to amortize and how many months or the period depend on the taxpayer. And of course, it will depend on the amount or what kind of research and development the company do. No? Limitations on deductions. No? So subsection shall not apply to letter A, any expenditure for the acquisition or improvement of land. So they are not research and development anyway. No? Or for the improvement of property to be used in connection with research and development of a character which is subject to depreciation and depletion. No? Because research and development has an expense. If you deferred, it is you can amortize it later. But the expenditure for the acquisition or improvement of land, you can charge it to depreciation. No? If depreciable yung building, but of course the land, no. Any expenditure paid or incurred for the purpose of ascertaining the existence, location, extent, or quality of any deposit of ore or other mineral, including oil or gas exploration. Oh, no? That is the exploration on the part of the mining companies. So those are the limitations when it comes to research and development. So research and development is an itemized deduction when you claim itemized deductions in your income tax return. No? Research and development is allowed provided you will be subjected to the requirements, no? In claiming the expenses. And what are the requirements when you claim expenses? You have to substantiate it and you have to see to it that this necessary and ordinary expense to your business. No? The next expense that we are going to discuss is the pension trust. No? So an employer establishing or maintaining a pension trust to provide for the payment of reasonable pension to his employees shall be allowed as a deduction, in addition to the contributions to such trust during the taxable year, to cover the pension liability, accruing during the year. Allowed as a deduction under subsection A1 of this section are reasonable amount transferred or paid into such trust during the taxable year in excess of such contributions, but only if such amount, number 1, has not theretofore been allowed as a deduction, and number 2, a portion in equal parts over a period of 10 consecutive years, beginning with the year in which the transfer or payment is made. So ito na yung sa pension trust, no? Okay. Because the employer will contribute to the trust. They are considered as trust fund for the benefit of the employees, no? Okay. Additional requirements for deductibility of certain payments. So there are certain payments. This is another kind of deductions, no? So any amount paid or payable which is otherwise deductible from or taken into account in computing gross income, or for which depreciation or amortization may be allowed under this section, shall be allowed as a deduction only if it is shown that the tax required to be deducted and withheld therefrom has been paid to the Bureau of Internal Revenue in accordance with this section 58 and 81 of the Code. So these are the additional requirements for the deductibility of certain payments, no? And what are the requirements? To make it deductible, no? Depreciation, amortization may be allowed under this section, shall be allowed as a deduction only if it is shown that the tax required to be deducted and withheld therefrom has been paid to the BAR in accordance with section 58 and 81 of this code. Why? Because certain expenses, no, there are mandatory expenses that requires withholding, no, of, say, expanded withholding tax or the creditable income tax. And what are the example of the payments that requires withholding? The rental, and how much is the requirement for the rental expense? 5% withholding. No? How about utilities? 2%. No? Repairs and maintenance? 2%. But for payment of labor in repairs, 2%. For payment of supplies in repairs and maintenance, then 1%. Okay. So those are the available itemized deductions that a taxpayer can deduct from his gross income in order to arrive at the net income, and that the net taxable income subject to tax. No? So you just apply the tax rate. For the optional standard deduction, this is another kind of deduction that the taxpayer opted to choose during the filing of his income tax return. And how much is this optional standard deductions? No? May question?
Wala pa ko.
Okay, shout out.
Shoutout ko ma'am, si Ma'am Faye Herrera.
Okay. Okay, si Ma'am Faye, no, napakasipag. Si Ma'am Faye Herrera, shout out po sa iyo.
Tapos si Ma'am Caron G. Yan,
Carol?
Caron G.
Okay, shout out also for Ma'am Carol G.
Tsaka si Ma'am Marjorie Importa, ma'am.
Okay, Ma'am Marjorie, shout out to you also. Thank you for watching.
Si Ma'am Malu Sabanate, ma'am.
Ma'am Malu Sabanati, thank you also for watching. No? These are, we are talking about deductions, no, tonight. No? So, another deductions that allowed to the taxpayer is the optional standard deduction. So, it is optional. That's why it is not mandatory. It's up to the taxpayer if he chooses the optional standard deductions. No? So in lieu of the deductions allowed under the preceding subsections, an individual subject to tax under section 24, other than a resident alien, may elect a standard deduction in an amount not exceeding 40% of his gross sales or gross receipts, as the case may be. No? So in the case of a corporation subject to tax under Section 27A and 28A1, it may elect a standard deduction in an amount not exceeding 40% of its gross income as defined in Section 32 of this code. No? So 40% of gross income. No? Okay, so for corporation. Unless the taxpayer signifies in his return his intention to elect the optional standard deduction, he shall be considered as having availed himself of the deductions allowed in the preceding subsections, meaning the itemized deductions. So the default in claiming deductions, if you don't opt for the standard deduction, then the default is you claim the itemized deductions. No? Such election when made in the return shall be irrevocable for the taxable year. No? So you choose it and it is applicable during the taxable year for which the return is made, provided that an individual is entitled to and claimed for the optional standard deduction shall not be required to submit with his tax return such financial statements otherwise required under this code. No? So since optional lang siya, no? So wala siyang financial statements. No? So provided further that a general professional partnership and the partners comprising such partnership may avail of the optional standard deduction only once, no? Either by the general professional partnership or the partners comprising the partnership. So in case of general professional partnership, either the two may apply. No? So if the general professional partnership applies for optional standard deduction, the partner can no longer claim for optional standard deduction. So if the partner claims for optional standard deduction, then the general professional partnership cannot claim for the optional deductions. No? So only one of them can avail. Provided finally that except when the commissioner otherwise permits, the said individual shall keep some records, no, pertaining to his gross sales or gross receipts, or the said corporation shall keep such records, no, pertaining to his gross income as defined in Section 32 of this code during the taxable year as may be required by the rules and regulations, of course promulgated by the Secretary of Finance. So notwithstanding the provision of this preceding subsection, the Secretary of Finance, upon recommendation of the Commissioner, shall, after a public hearing shall have been held for this purpose, may prescribe by rules and regulations limitations or ceilings for any of the itemized deduction under subsection A to J of this section. No? For purposes of determining such ceiling or limitations, the Secretary of Finance shall consider the following factors: the adequacy of the prescribed limits on the actual expenditure requirements of its particular industry and the effects of inflation on expenditure levels. No? Provided further that no ceiling shall further be imposed on items of expense already subject to ceiling under the present law. So ano ba yung mga expenses na may limit na or may maximum lang? The representation expenses, no? How much is the limit? 1% for sale of services, 1% of sales for sale of services, and 0.5% of sales for sale of goods. No? Ano pa? Yung contributions. No? There is also a limit. 5% of the net income before deducting contributions for corporations, and 10% of income before deducting the contribution in case of individual taxpayers. Okay. So we have discussed to you the items that are deductible for income tax purposes. Now, here are the items not deductible under Section 36. No? So, ano naman itong mga items na hindi deductible? Okay? So, in computing net income, no deduction shall in any case be allowed in respect to, number one, personal, living, or family expenses, because those are personal, no? They're not related to business. Number two, any amount paid out for new buildings or for permanent improvements or betterments made to increase the value of any property or estate. So it cannot be deducted also. So the subsection shall not apply to intangible drilling and development costs incurred in petroleum operations, which are deductible under subsection G1, section 34 of this code. No? So the intangibles incurred by the petroleum operations have a different way of deducting it in their income tax. No? Any amount expended in restoring property or making good the exhaustion thereof, for which an allowance is or has been made. No? So, hindi rin pwedeng i-deduct. Number 4, premiums paid on any life insurance policy covering the life of any officer or employee or of any person financially interested in any trade or business carried on by the taxpayer, individual or corporation, when the taxpayer is directly or indirectly a beneficiary under such policy. So, hindi pwede. Another is the losses from sales or exchanges of property. So, why is it na hindi pwedeng i-deduct sa income? In computing net income, no deduction shall in any case be allowed in respect of losses from sales or exchanges of property directly or indirectly. Number 1, ito yung hindi pwede i-deduct, between losses between members of a family. For purposes of this paragraph, the family of an individual shall include only his brothers and sisters, whether by the whole or half-blood, spouse, ancestors, and lineal descendants. No? So if this losses between family or the exchange of family, no deductions allowed. Number 2, except in the case of distribution and liquidation between an individual and corporation, more than 50% in value of the outstanding stock of which is owned directly or indirectly by or for such individuals. No? So, hindi rin pwedeng i-claim as deductions. Number 3, except in the case of distribution in liquidation, liquidate na yung business. Between two corporations, more than 50% is in value of the outstanding stock of which is owned directly or indirectly by or for the same individuals. No? Isa lang may-ari. If either one of such corporations with respect to the taxable year of the corporation preceding the date of the sale of exchange was under the law applicable to such taxable year. No? So a personal holding company or a foreign personal holding company. Di rin pwede. And between the grantor and a fiduciary of any trust. No? Why? Because the reason there is they are related parties. No? May interest. So between the fiduciary of and the fiduciary of a trust and the fiduciary of another trust, if the same person is a grantor with respect to its trust. No? So sila-sila lang. Between fiduciary of a trust and beneficiary of such trust. So, hindi din pwede. No? Kasi siya yung fiduciary. Tapos yung beneficiary, sila-sila lang yung magkiklaim ng losses. Hindi pwede. No? Special provisions regarding income and deductions of insurance companies, whether domestic or foreign. So, what are the deductions allowed to insurance companies? No? Special deductions allowed to insurance companies. In the case of insurance companies, whether domestic or foreign doing business in the Philippines, the net additions, if any, required by law to be made within the year to reserve funds and the sums other than dividends paid within the year on policy and annuity contracts, no, may be deducted from their gross income, provided, however, that the released reserve be treated as income for the year of release, no? So ito yung case ng insurance companies, no? Excuse me. Okay. So letter B, this is under section 37, no? So I have discussed to you the letter A. Now letter B, the mutual insurance companies, no? See, in the case of mutual fire and mutual employers liability and mutual workmen's compensation and mutual casualty insurance companies, no? Ito yung mga non-life insurance, requiring the members to make premium deposits to provide for losses and expenses, said company shall not return as income any portion of the premium deposits returned to their policyholders, but shall return as taxable income all income received by them from all other sources, plus such portion of the premium deposits as are retained by the companies for purposes other than the payment of losses and expenses and reinsurance reserves, no? So these insurance companies are being regulated by the Insurance Commission, no? That's why all insurance companies are filing their income tax return in Manila, no? Because they are where the Insurance Commission is situated, because they are being monitored, no, by the Insurance Commission. Okay, so mutual marine insurance companies, no? So these mutual marine insurance companies shall include in the return of gross income the gross premium collected and received by them, less amounts paid to policyholders on account of premium previously paid by them and interest paid under those amounts between the ascertainment and payment thereof, no? So those are for the mutual marine insurance companies, no? Letter D, assessment insurance companies. Assessment insurance companies, whether domestic or foreign, may deduct from their gross income the actual deposit of sums with the officers of the government of the Philippines pursuant to law as additions to guarantee or reserve funds, no? So these are the assessment insurance companies. Section 38, losses from wash sales of stocks or premiums or securities, no? So the losses incurred, no, from the wash sales or stock or securities, no? So in the case of any loss claimed to have been sustained from any sale or other disposition of shares of stocks or securities where it appears that within a period beginning 30 days before the date of such sale or disposition and ending 30 days after such date, the taxpayer has acquired by purchase or by exchange, upon which the entire amount of gain or loss was recognized by law or has entered into a contract, a contract or option, so to acquire substantially identical stock or securities, then no deduction for the loss shall be allowed, no, under section 34, unless the claim is made by a dealer, no, in stock or securities and with respect to a transaction made in the ordinary course of business of such dealer, no? So hindi siya allowed yung losses from wash sale. If the amount of the stock or securities acquired or covered by the contract or option to acquire is less than the amount of stock or securities sold or otherwise disposed of, then the particular shares of stocks or securities, the loss from the sale or other disposition of which is not deductible, shall be determined under rules and regulations prescribed by the Secretary of Finance, no? So ito yung mga amount of stocks or securities acquired or covered by the contract or option, no? So it is less than the amount of stock or securities sold or otherwise. No? So the shares of stocks or securities lost from sale or other disposition. So yun na yung i-declare mo. Letter C, if the amount of stock or securities acquired or covered by the contract or option to acquire, which is not less than the amount of stock or securities sold or otherwise disposed of, then the particular shares of stocks or securities, the acquisition of which, or the contract or option to acquire, which resulted in the non-deductibility of the loss, shall be determined under rules and regulations prescribed by Secretary of Finance upon recommendation of the Commissioner. So that pertains to the losses from was sales of stocks or securities. No? The transactions in this financial and commercial transactions involving shares of stocks, no, or securities. There are cases wherein some people are addicted, no, to the buy and sell of shares of stocks. No? Parang gamble din siya. No? Okay, so capital gains and losses. No? So what are these capital gains and the losses? Capital assets. The term capital assets means property held by the taxpayer, whether or not connected with this trade or business, but does not include stock in trade of the taxpayer or other property of a kind which would properly be included in the inventory of the taxpayer if on hand at the close of the taxable year, or property held by the taxpayer primarily for sale to customers, no, in the ordinary course of his trade or business, or property used in the trade or business of a character which is subject to the allowance for depreciation. No? So there are assets na, they are not capital assets, but they are claiming the depreciation. No? Okay, so that is the definition of capital assets. No? Why classification of assets, whether capital or ordinary, is very important, because if you are classified as capital assets, then some of the requirements, especially in the sale, no, is different, no, the requirements. No? So net capital gain, the term net capital gain means the excess of the gains from sale or exchanges of capital assets over the losses from such sales or exchanges. So saan charge yung net capital gain? Oh, excess of the gains from sale or exchanges of capital assets over the losses from such sales or exchanges. So, saan lang siya charge yung capital loss? No? Sa gain. No? So, hindi siya charge sa retained earnings. Net capital loss, the term net capital loss means the excess of the losses from sale or exchanges of capital assets over the gains from such sales or exchanges. No? So, yun yung net capital loss. Percentage taken into account. In the case of a taxpayer other than a corporation, only the following percentages of the gain or loss, we're talking of gain or loss of the shares of stocks or the property. Gain or loss recognized upon the sale or exchange of a capital asset shall be taken into account in computing net capital gain, net capital loss, or the net income. So number one, 100% if the capital assets has been paid for not more than 12 months. No? And 50% if the capital assets been held for more than 12 months. No? So 100% of the capital assets has been held for not more than 12 months. And then in the number two, 50% has been held for more than 12 months. No? So you have to take the percentage into account. Limitations on capital loss. So, what is the limit on capital loss? No? Losses from sales or exchange capital assets shall be allowed only to the extent of the gains from such sales or exchanges. No? So, if a bank or trust company incorporated under the laws of the Philippines, a substantial part of whose business is the receipt of deposits, no? Sales, any bond, debenture, note, or certificate, or other evidence of indebtedness issued by any corporation, no? So including one issued by government or political subdivisions thereof. So with interest, coupons, or in registration form, any loss resulting from such sale shall not be subject to the foregoing limitations and shall not be included in determining the applicability of such limitations to other losses. No? So yun po yung limitation on the capital gains. No? And then we have the letter D, net capital loss carryover. Ito yung NOLCO. No? No, this is not NOLCO pala because this is capital, no? Ang NOLCO, net operating loss carryover. So, ito pala is net capital loss carryover. So, if any taxpayer other than a corporation sustains in any taxable year a net capital loss, such loss in an amount not in excess of the net income for such year shall be treated in the succeeding taxable year as a loss from the sale of exchange of capital assets held for not more than 12 months. No? So, yun ang ruling natin sa net capital loss. How about retirement of bonds? No? So, the retirement of bonds for purposes of this title amounts received by the holder upon the retirement of bonds. Debentures, notes, or certificates, or other evidences of indebtedness issued by the corporation. So, ito yung mga retirement of bonds purchased by the investor. No? Including those issued by government or political subdivision thereof, with interest coupons or in registered form, shall be considered as amounts received in exchange therefore. No? So, yun sa retirement ng bonds. No? Okay. Shout out.
Shout out si Ma'am Ces Miranda.
Okay.
Yun.
So, shout out to Ma'am Ces Miranda.
Pang question.
Wala pang question. O sige. O sige, tuloy lang po tayo, no, on the basis for determining gain or loss from sale or disposition of property. So, you dispose your property. How are you going to determine the gain or loss in the disposition of property? No? The basis of property shall be, number one, the cost thereof in the case of property acquired on or after March 1, 1913. So, it's if such property was acquired by purchase. No? The fair market price or value as of the date of acquisition if the same was acquired by inheritance. No? So, market value and then the date of acquisition. No? If the property was acquired by gift, the basis shall be the same as it would be in the hands of the donor or the last preceding owner by whom it was not acquired by gift, except that if such basis is greater than the fair market value of the property at the time of the gift, then for the purpose of determining loss, the basis shall be such fair market value. No? So, since ang BAR, the value is always cost. So, in this example, no? So authority allow the taxpayers to determine loss, the basis shall be subject to fair market value. No? Okay. Number 4, if the property was acquired for less than adequate consideration, so mas mababa yung presyo kaysa what is current, no? So the property was acquired for less than an adequate consideration in money or money's worth. The basis of such property is the amount paid, no, by the transferee for the property, or the basis is defined in paragraph C5 of this section. Malabo na mata, no? If the property was acquired in a transaction where gain or loss is not recognized. Malabo ng mata sa pagbabasa. Under paragraph C2 of this section. Also, yun yung basis ng determination of the gain or loss from the sale or disposition of the property. No? So, anong basis? The cost, no? Or the fair market price or value, the date, as of the date of the acquisition. No? Pagka by gift naman, the fair market value also of the property. No? Kung acquired for less than the adequate consideration in money or money's worth, the basis, amount paid by the transferee for the property. No? So the basis is defined in paragraph C5 if the property was acquired in a transaction where gain or loss is not recognized under paragraph of this section. No? So, exchange of property. So, dito naman sa exchange of property. Why are we talking about this exchanges, or these are transactions involving properties in order to determine their income? No? So, exchange of property, the general rule, except as herein provided, no? Upon the sale or exchange of property, the entire amount, no, of the gain or loss, as the case may be, shall be recognized. No? So shall be recognized in the exchange of property. Exception: no gain or loss shall be recognized if in pursuance of a plan of merger or consolidation. Why no gain or loss? Because merger and or consolidation, the same companies are involved. No? So the corporation, which is a party to a merger or consolidation, exchanges property solely for stock in a corporation, which is a party to the merger or consolidation. Kasi sila pa rin hindi naman nagbabago yung ownership. Kasi sila pa rin yung nandyan sa corporation. A shareholder exchanges stock in a corporation, which is a party to the merger or consolidation, solely for the stock of another corporation, also a party to the merger. Nag-merge lang sila, or a party to the merger or consolidation. Or a security holder, no? To my shareholder, a security holder, no? Which is a party to the merger or consolidation, exchanges his securities in such corporation solely for stock or securities in such corporations, no? Which is a party to the merger or consolidation. No gain or loss shall also be recognized if property is transferred to a corporation by a person in exchange for stock. No? So in that case, if you want to be exempted, the BAR requires for a certificate of or for a ruling, no, of exemption or unit of participation in such a corporation of which, as a result of such exchange, said person alone or together with others not exceeding 4 persons gains control of said corporation. No? Provided that stocks issued for services shall not be considered as issued in return for property. Ito yung shares of stocks, no, in exchange of the property. So, why is it that it is not, you will not recognize gain or loss? Because the owner of the stocks is also the same as the owner of the property. So, walang nagbago. Only that it is in the form of stocks. No? So, the contribution to the company is in the form of the property, and that corporation issues shares of stocks for the contribution. So, the same owner. Why same owner? Because the person who owns the property is also the one who owns the shares of stocks. No? Kaya according to the law, no gain or loss shall be recognized. No? The same person is involved. The same person owns the shares of stocks in the property. No? May question?
Wala pa, ma'am. Shoutout lang, ma'am, ulit.
Okay.
Si Ma'am Ami Oclaret, ma'am.
Ma'am Ami
Oclaret.
Oclaret, shout out po.
Kasi yung username niya, ma'am, Fuji Nadreb. Good evening daw. Fuji
Okay.
yung username, ma'am.
Sige, Fuji, no? Good evening po, shout out sa iyo. No? Thank you for watching. Okay? So, alam nyo, nakakalito talaga itong mga transactions involving property, no? Ito naman, exchange not solely in kind, no? Kanina yung property in exchange of shares of stocks. Ngayon, exchange na din ito, but not solely in kind, no? So, if in connection with an exchange described in the above exceptions, an individual, a shareholder, a security holder, or a corporation receives not only stock or securities permitted to be received without the recognition of gain or loss, but also money, no? Tanggap din siya ng money kasi binayaran siya, and or property, the gain, if any, but not the loss, shall be recognized, but in an amount not exist of the sum of the money and the fair market value of such other property, no? Received. Provided that as to the shareholders, if the money and or the property received has the effect of a distribution of a taxable dividend, no? Kasi sometimes nire-reclassify lang nila yung expenses, pero yung totoo dividend na pala yun, or the return of investment to the stockholders, no? So there shall be taxed as dividend to the shareholder an amount of the gain recognized not in excess of his proportionate share of the undistributed earnings and profits of the corporation. The remainder, if any of the gain recognized, shall be treated as a capital gain, no? So, ano yung capital gains natin? Subject to tax. If in connection with the exchange described in the above exceptions, the transferor corporation receives not only stock, no? Hindi lang stocks, permitted to be received without the recognition of gain or loss, but also money and or other property. Then, if the corporation receiving such money and or other property distributes it in pursuance of the plan of merger or consolidation, mag-merge companies, no gain to the corporation shall be recognized from the exchange, but if the corporation receiving such other property and or money does not distribute it in pursuance of the plan of merger, hindi tinuloy yung merger or consolidation, the gain, if any, but not the loss to the corporation shall be recognized, but in an amount not in excess of the sum of such money and the fair market value of such other property so received, which is not distributed, no? Kasi may instrument na, may plan of merger and consolidation, pero hindi naman natuloy. That will become taxable. Okay, so, assumption of liability. Okay. If the taxpayer, in connection with the exchanges described in the foregoing exceptions, receives stock or securities which would be permitted to be received without the recognition of the gain, if it were the sole consideration and as part of the consideration, another party to the exchange assumes a liability of the taxpayer or acquires from the taxpayer property subject to a liability, then such assumption or acquisition shall not be treated as money and or other property and shall not prevent the exchange from being within the exception. So, accepted pa rin kasi hindi naman niya nabayad. Yung liability, inassume lang niya dun sa seller, no? So, if the amount of the liabilities assumed plus the amount of the liabilities to which the property is subject exceed the total of the adjusted basis of the property transferred pursuant to such exchange, then such excess shall be considered as a gain. No? So, may gain na from the sale or exchange of capital assets or of property which is not a capital asset, as the case may be. And, of course, gain is taxable. Why? Because gain is already income. No? Magiging taxable na siya. Okay, so basis. Mahaba pa itong mga shares na to eh, no? But these are included in the study of income, no? So basis, ito yung mga may twist, may mga complicated na transactions, no? So basis, the basis of the stock or securities received by the transferor upon the exchange specified in the above exception shall be the same as the basis of the property, stock or securities exchange, no? Decreased by number 1, the money received, and number 2, the fair market value of the other property, no? Received, and increased by A, the amount treated as dividend of the shareholder, and also by the amount of any gain that was recognized on the exchange, no? So, provided that the property received as both shall have as basis its fair market value, provided further that if as part of the consideration to the transferor, the transferee of property assumes a liability of the transferor, no? So, inassume niya yung utang, ng transferor, ng owner ng property, or acquires from the latter property subject to a liability, such assumption or acquisition in the amount of the liability shall, for purposes of this paragraph, be treated as money, no? So, treated as money received by the transferor on the exchange, no? Sa exchange ng property. Provided finally that if the transferor receives several kinds of stocks or securities, the commissioner is hereby authorized to allocate the basis among the several classes of stocks or securities. So, may iba ng treatment, no? The basis of the property transferred in the hands of the transferee shall be the same as it would be in the hands of the transferor, increased by the amount of the gain recognized to the transferor on the transfer, no? So, yun yung mga basis ng property transferred, no? So, between the transferor and the transferee. No? Okay. Okay, so let's now go to the definitions. Definitions are very important because it would be the basis, no, in interpreting the law, no? And taxation is a law. And what we are reading right now is the law on income taxation, no? So the term securities means bonds and debentures but not notes of whatever class or duration. So iba yung securities, no? The term merger or consolidation when used in this section shall be understood to mean, number 1, the ordinary merger or consolidation, or number 2, the acquisition by one corporation of all or substantially all the properties of another corporation solely for stock, no? Kaya nag-consolidate lang sila. Provided that for a transaction to be regarded as a merger or consolidation within the purview of this section, it must be undertaken for a bona fide business purpose and not solely for the purpose of escaping the burden of taxation, no? So, hindi for purposes of tax evasion. Provided further that in determining whether a bona fide business purpose exists, each and every step of the transaction shall be considered, and the whole transaction or series of transactions shall be treated as a single unit. No? So, provided finally that in determining whether the property transferred constitutes a substantial portion of the property of the transferor, the term property shall be taken to include the cash assets of the transferor. No? The term control, when used in this section, shall mean ownership of stocks in the corporation possessing at least 51% of the total voting power of all classes of stocks entitled to vote. So pagka ang ownership mo is more than 50%, majority ka na, no? So whatever policy that should be approved or during the voting, no? Since you are 51%, majority ka na. So lahat ng gusto mo sa company will be followed, no? Kasi majority ka. Okay. The Secretary of Finance, upon recommendation of the Commissioner, is hereby authorized to issue rules and regulations for the purpose, substantially all, and for the proper implementation of this section. No? Okay, so let's have a 5 minutes break, no? Kasi CCR. Break lang po, sandali. Before we discuss inventories. Kasi meron tayong video on this, no, sa inventories natin. It's very important for the taxpayer right now. Why? Because inventories may be a great source of assessment, no, in your part if you don't record your inventories well, no? So let's have a 5 minutes break. Nag-waste ka ng oras mo. Your knowledge.
Ma'am,
Okay, so question.
Pero shoutout ko muna, ma'am, si Ma'am Teresa Valle
Oo, shout out Ma'am Teresa
from
Valle.
Imus, Cavite, ma'am.
Okay, from Cavite.
Tapos si Ma'am Sandra Eborda, ma'am.
Oh, familiar, no? Shout out also Ma'am Sandra Iborda.
From Santa Maria, Bulacan naman siya.
Okay.
Question
From-
natin, ma'am. Galing po kay Ma'am Caron G.
Okay.
Paano daw po pag humiram sila ng pera sa isang tao para idagdag sa puhunan, may ide-deduct po ba yun as expenses?
The interest po. Pero yung pera mismo na buo na hiniram, hindi. But the interest will be deducted as an expense. Kasi ang capital, hindi po siya deductible na expense. Kasi actually, ang capital, hindi mo in-expense yun eh. Binili mo lang yun ng goods and then binenta mo. So ano yung magiging expenses mo doon? Yung purchases against the sale. Pero yung capital, nandoon pa rin yung capital.
Tapos mamang question po galing po kay Ma'am Teresa Valle. May annual inventory filing, ma'am. Lahat
Yes.
po ba ng business required magpasa?
Yes po. Basta't may inventory kayo.
Tapos ang next niya, ma'am, kung hindi po nakapagpasa, may penalty po ba? At magkano daw po kaya ang assessment ng penalty?
Yes, usually the penalty of the inventory is 1,000. Pero depende yan sa RDO at saka depende rin sa gaano karami yung inventories mo na hindi mo na submit, no? But usually, karamihan talaga, the late filing of inventories is 1,000 po ang penalties. Okay, so wala na. Now, let's go to the discussion of inventories, no? Kasi under Section 41 of this National Internal Revenue Code, we have here the inventories, no? So, inventories, whenever in the judgment of the commissioner, the use of inventories is necessary in order to determine clearly the income of any taxpayer. Why? Kasi sa mga resale, sa mga manufacturing inventories are very important, no? Actually, the money of these companies engaged in manufacturing, engaged in reselling, they are investing so much or use so much of their capital in inventories, no? That's why the most important possession that they have in their business are the inventories. So inventory shall be taken by such taxpayer upon such basis as the Secretary of Finance upon recommendation of the Commissioner. No? So the Commissioner may by rules and regulations prescribe as conforming as nearly as may be to the best accounting practice in the trade or business and as most clearly reflecting the income. So, yun yung sa inventories. If the taxpayer, after having been complied with the terms and the conditions prescribed by the Commissioner, uses a particular method of valuing his inventory for any taxable year, then such method shall be used in all subsequent taxable years. The consistency in the valuation method of inventories, unless with the approval of the Commissioner, a change to a different method is authorized. So ano ba yung mga samples natin in valuing the inventory, no? Maintaining the inventory, the last in first out or the first in first out, no? Method. So the Commissioner finds that the nature of the stock on hand, its scarcity, liquidity, marketability, and price movement is such the inventory gains should be considered realized for tax purposes, no? Pero mo may inventory pa lang pero pag realized for tax purposes, it is necessary to modify the valuation method for purposes of ascertaining the income, profits, or loss in a more realistic manner, no? So the Commissioner also see to it kung ano yung magandang method, no? And also in the maintenance and submission of inventories. Just like pawn shops, just like yung mga jewelries, they are not required to submit inventories. Why? For security reason. No? Kasi the inventories, the jewelries are expensive. No? So it might endanger the company. So provided, however, that the commissioner shall not exercise his authority to require a change in inventory method more often than once every 3 years. No? Provided further that any change in an inventory valuation method must be subject to approval by the Secretary of Finance. No? Kasi the tax, for tax purposes, the BAR also follows the accounting standards, no, sa valuation. So ano ba yung accounting standards in the valuation of inventories? Ngayon, the lower of cost or net realizable value, no? Lower or cost or net realizable value ng inventory. Why? Kasi may mga allowance na for obsolescence, may mga allowance na ng mga damaged goods, no? So only the realizable value. Okay. So that is for the inventories. But aside from that, for inventory purposes, no, you have to be careful in making your inventories. It should be that if you are preparing an inventory, it should tally with your purchases. Why? Because during the examination, the tax examiner will do an inventory analysis. And what should this examiner be doing during the inventory analysis? No, they will start with the beginning inventory. Your beginning inventory for the year is your ending inventory last year. Okay, so add the purchases during the year and then deduct the ending inventory during the year, and it should tally with the inventory that you reported in the ending. No, because if it will not, then that can be a source of deficiency income that will be assessed against you. Why? Halimbawa, you have the inventory beginning and then you add the purchases during the year, no? And then deduct the ending inventory and then add the markup during the year, no? The markup, ibig sabihin yung tubo mo because you buy halimbawa the inventory for 1 peso and then binenta mo siya ng 150, no? So how much is your markup? Then once it is now marked up by the examiner, it will be matched against the sales that you made during the year. If they doesn't match, then the examiner will assess your deficiency income, and the reason is the unaccounted inventory, no? Because if there are unaccounted inventories, it can be treated as other income, or unreported income. Okay. Section 42, income from sources within the Philippines. So what are these income within the Philippines, no? So letter A, gross income from sources within the Philippines are the following, no? Treated as gross income from sources within the Philippines. Interest, no? Interest. What is interest? It is the cost of money, no? That you pay for the use also of money. No? Inutang mo, ginamit mo, so you have to pay for the interest. Interest derived from sources within the Philippines, and interest on bonds, notes, or other interest-bearing obligation of residents, corporate or otherwise, no? So those are interest, no? From bonds, interest-bearing obligations. No? Dividends, the amount received as dividend from a domestic corporation. So ito yung mga income from sources within the Philippines, o dividend. Saan siya nanggagaling? You invest in a corporation, so you have shares of stocks. The domestic corporation is gaining, and then the board of directors decided to declare a dividend, so you receive now the dividend. That dividend is coming from a domestic corporation or corporations registered in the Philippines are now considered income within the Philippines. No? If from a foreign corporation, unless less than 50% of the gross income of such foreign corporation for the 3-year period ending with the close of its taxable year preceding the declarations of such dividends, or for such part of such period as the corporation has been in existence, was derived from sources within the Philippines, as determined under the provisions of this section, but only in an amount, which bears the same ratio to such dividends as the gross income of the corporations for such period derived from sources within the Philippines. No? Bears to its gross income from all sources. So yun. For dividends. No? Services, compensation for labor or personal services performed in the Philippines. No? So these are gross income received or sources within the Philippines. No? Okay. Rentals and royalties. No? So ano itong mga rentals and royalties? These are passive income. No? So rentals and royalties from property located in the Philippines or from any interest in such property, including rentals or royalties for. So saan nanggagaling itong rentals and royalties? The use or the right to use or privilege to use in the Philippines, any copyright, patent, design or model, plan, secret formula or process, goodwill, trademark, trade brand or other like property or right. No? So or right. So right is a property. Ha? Kaya yung bayang magiliw doon hari, tanggalin mo na yun. So how are you going to trim it? No? Nasa free bookkeeping lahat yun. Tanggalin mo yun because those are property right. Ha? They are protected by law. Property rights na yan, especially yung mga ownership ng mga composition. Even if they are not registered in the IPO, they are protected by the law. No? So, the use of or the right to use in the Philippines, any industrial, commercial, or scientific equipment. No? So, these are intangibles, kaya nga royalties ang pinag-uusapan dito. Why? Because the payment for the use of intangibles are called royalties. No? The supply of any assistance that is ancillary and subsidiary to and is furnished as a means of enabling the application or enjoyment of any such property or right as is mentioned in paragraph A, any such equipment as is mentioned in paragraph B, or any such knowledge or information as is mentioned in paragraph C. No? So yung supply of assistance, no, that is ancillary and subsidiary to, meaning secondary lang. No? The supply of services by an unresident person or his employee in connection with the use of property or rights belonging to or the installation or operation of any brand, machinery, or other apparatus purchased from such non-resident person. No? Supply of services. Technical advice, assistance, or services rendered in connection with technical management or administration of any scientific, industrial, or commercial undertaking, venture, project, or scheme. No? So dyan nanggagaling yung rentals and royalties. The use of or the right to use motion picture films. No? So kasama din yan. Ownership din yan. Rights mo rin yan. Films or videotapes for use in connection with television and tapes for use in connection with radio broadcasting. Wala pa dito yung mga video sa YouTube, no? Hindi pa kasama. But definitely that will come out later. Why? Because even the videos that you upload in the YouTube are your own property and you have the proprietary rights over your videos, no? Kita mo, magpapaalam ka pa and YouTube is very particular about it, no? Sale of real property, gains, profits, and income from the sale of real property located in the Philippines. No? Sale of personal property, gains, profits, and income from the sale of personal property. Yung isa, real property. Ito naman, personal property. As determined in subsection A of this section. No? So yun yung mga gains and profits. Ano ba yung mga personal property na medyo mahal? The jewelries, no? Mga jewelries na that will cost you millions. No? taxable income from sources within the Philippines. Yung kanina, ano yun? Gross income from sources within the Philippines. Ngayon naman yung taxable income from sources within the Philippines. No? Because yung gross pa lang yun. Hindi pa yun yung taxable income. Ito taxable income na. No? So general rule, from the items of gross income, no, in subsection A, this section, there shall be deducted. So pag sinabi mo kasi na taxable income, net of deductions na yan ng mga allowable expenses. No? So losses and other deductions properly allocated thereto an arrearable part of expenses, interest, losses, and other deductions effectively connected with the business or trade conducted exclusively within the Philippines, which cannot definitely be allocated to some items or class of gross income, provided that such items or deductions shall be allowed only if fully substantiated by all the information necessary for its calculation. So, fully substantiated. The remainder, if any, shall be treated in full as taxable income from sources within the Philippines. No? So, yun yung taxable income from sources na within the Philippines. Why is it necessary that you have to identify income with sources within the Philippines? Also to know or discover its taxability. No? Exceptions. No deductions for interest paid or incurred abroad. No? So yung mga interest paid or incurred abroad, hindi siya pwedeng i-deduct. No? Shall be allowed from the item of gross income specified in subsection A unless indebtedness was actually incurred to provide funds for use in connection with the conduct of operation or trade or business in the Philippines. No? May unless naman eh. Pag sinabi mong unless, exception yan dun sa first na sinabi. No? So, gross income from sources without the Philippines. Ito naman outside the Philippines. No? So, why is it necessary that we have to identify this income without the Philippines? Because if you are a Filipino citizen, no, resident citizen of the Philippines, you are taxable on your income from sources within and without the Philippines. No? Kasi resident citizen ka eh. The following items of gross income shall be treated as income from sources without the Philippines. So without the Philippines. Interest other than those derived from sources within the Philippines as provided in paragraph 1 of subsection A of this section. Dividends other than those derived from sources within the Philippines as provided in paragraph 2 of subsection A of this section. No? So, compensation for labor or personal services performed without the Philippines. No? So, consider din siya na income without the Philippines. Rentals or royalties from property located without the Philippines, nasa ibang bansa, or from any interest in such property, including rentals or royalties, for the use of or for the privilege of using without the Philippines. No? So patents, copyrights, secret process, and formulas, goodwill, trademark, these are intangibles. No? Trade brands, franchises, and other like properties. No? So, without the Philippines. Gains, profits, and income from the sale of real property located without the Philippines, meaning outside the Philippines. Letter D, taxable income from sources without the Philippines. From the items of the gross income, kasi yung sinasabi natin, gross income pa yun. Specified in subsection C of this section, there shall be deducted the expenses, losses, and other deductions properly apportioned or allocated thereto and a rateable part of any expense, loss, or other deduction, which cannot definitely be allocated to some items or classes of gross income. No? The remainder, if any, shall be treated in full as taxable income from sources without the Philippines. No? Sino yung taxable on income without the Philippines. Yung mga Filipino resident citizen here in the Philippines. So, kahit may income sila outside the Philippines, they are still taxable. Like what happened to Senator Manny Pacquiao, no? So, lahat ng income niya in the US are still taxable in the Philippines. And if you fail to declare it or report it in your income tax, then you will be penalized by the BIR, no? Wala ang pang questions?
Wala pa, ma'am. Shoutout ko, ma'am, si Ma'am Erica Oliva, watching from Cagayan daw po.
Wow, no? Shout out, Ma'am Erica from Cagayan, no? Shout out, no? Sana lahat walang COVID dyan. Kasi hindi na tayo nakakagala, no? May mga pending na pupuntahan, patasa na tayo. Hindi na tuloy. Ibale, kailangan magpahinga din, no? At saka kailangan din magpahinga ng mundo, ng earth, kasi na-exhaust siya. Kaya, ano lang muna, tiis, no? So, income from sources partly within and partly without the Philippines. So, ibig sabihin yung partly within, also partly without, no? Part ng income mo within and also yung iba without the Philippines. So, the items of gross income, expenses, losses, and deductions other than those specified in subsections A and C of this section shall be allocated or apportioned to sources within or without the Philippines. No? So, under the rules and regulations prescribed by the Secretary of Finance upon recommendation of the Commissioner, where items of gross income are separately allocated to sources within the Philippines, there shall be deducted for the purpose of computing the taxable income therefrom, the expenses, losses, and other deductions properly apportioned or allocated thereto, and a rateable part of other expenses, losses, or other deductions which cannot definitely be allocated to some items or classes of gross income. So, prorate, no? Pagka hindi mo ma-identify saan ba yung expenses na yan, no? The remainder, if any, shall be included in full as taxable income from sources within the Philippines. So, in the case of gross income derived from sources partly within and partly without the Philippines, the taxable income may first be computed by deducting the expenses, losses, or other deductions apportioned or allocated thereto, and a rateable part of any expense, loss, or other deduction which cannot definitely be allocated to some items or classes of gross income, and the portion of such taxable income attributable to sources within the Philippines may be determined by processes or formulas or general apportionment prescribed by the Secretary of Finance, no? So, gains, profits, and income from the sale of personal property produced in whole or in part by the taxpayer within and sold without the Philippines, or produced in whole or in part by the taxpayer without and sold within the Philippines shall be treated as derived partly from sources within, no? And partly from sources without the Philippines, no? So, yun yung treatment. So, gains, profits, and income derived from the purchase of personal property within and its sale without the Philippines, or from the purchase of personal property, no? Personal property, ha? Kaya pag personal property, pwede mong dalhin kahit saan. Kasi kung real property yan, hindi mo yan madala without the Philippines, no? Within lang. So, gains, profits, and income derived from the purchase of personal property within and its sale without the Philippines, or from the purchase of personal property without and its sale within the Philippines, shall be treated as derived entirely from sources within the country in which sold, no? So, provided, however, that gain from the sale of shares of stocks in domestic corporation shall be treated as derived entirely from sources within the Philippines, kasi domestic corporation siya, regardless of where the said shares are sold, no? Kasi shares of stocks are considered personal property. The transfer by a non-resident alien or a foreign corporation to anyone of any share of stocks issued by a domestic corporation shall not be effected or made in its book unless the transferor has filed with the commissioner a bond conditioned upon the future payment by him of any income tax that may be due on the gains derived from such transfer, no? Or the commissioner has certified that the taxes, if any, imposed in this title and due on the gain realized from sale or transfer has been paid, it shall be the duty of the transferor and the corporation, the shares of which are sold or transferred, to advise the transferee of this requirement. Subject kasi sa capital gains tax because shares of stocks are registrable property. No? So, hindi siya i-register ng corporation in the name of the new owner without passing through the BIR. No? So, definitions as used in this section, the words sale or sold, no, include exchange or exchanged, and the word produced includes created, fabricated, manufactured, extracted, processed, cured, or aged. No? Itong mga terms na to depende kasi ito sa product, no? Sa proseso. Accounting periods na, the methods of accounting. No? So, why is accounting periods and methods of accounting also very important? Why? Because the methods of accounting, no, it will determine the income, no, recognize the income of the taxpayer. And sometimes there are required methods of accounting, no, by the tax authority. No? So, ano yung general rule natin on the accounting periods and methods of accounting? No? So, for the accounting period, ito yung fiscal year natin on or calendar year. No? Sino lang yung pwede sa fiscal year? Only the corporations. But for calendar year, fiscal year only for corporations. Calendar year, pwede corporations and individual. No? Individual for calendar year lang. Yung January to December lang pwede nila. Methods of accounting can be cash or accrual. No? So, Section 43, shout out.
Ma'am, mayroon pong question, ma'am.
Okay, sige.
Tanong ma'am ni Ma'am Erica Oliva from Cagayan. Kung ano po yung mga mari-review for the bookkeeping NC3 exam? Kung alam niyo daw po, ma'am.
Hindi ko alam, pero ilagay mo lang dyan, ha, kasi may reference naman tayo. Tingnan natin. Kasi in C3, in C1, in C2, in C3, hanggang in C4 yung bookkeeping eh. Diba? Kasi one time nag-apply sana yung PSTRI na maging assessment, diba, Hari, ng bookkeeping, yung kay Delgra, hindi naman tayo na approve noon because doon nga, malay mo dito, pero may COVID na. No? So, we will come to you, no? Ilagay na lang po natin dyan sa comment portion kasi meron naman tayong reference doon sa TESDA. No? Titingnan natin yan. Pero in C3 yan, tapos ka na ng in C1, in C2. No? Okay. Tapos yung sunod dyan, pag pumasa ka na, in C4 na. No? So hanggang in C4 lang yung bookkeeping sa TESDA. Okay. So, Section 43, General Rule. No? So, the taxable income shall be computed upon the basis of the taxpayer's annual accounting period or fiscal year or calendar year as the case may be. No? So, in accordance with the method of accounting regularly employed in keeping the books of such taxpayer, but if no such method of accounting has been so employed, or if the method employed does not clearly reflect the income, the computation shall be made in accordance with such method as in the opinion of the commissioner clearly reflects the income. If the taxpayer's annual accounting period is other than a fiscal year as defined in Section 22Q, or if the taxpayer has no annual accounting period or does not keep books, or if the taxpayer is an individual, the taxable income shall be computed on the basis of the calendar year. So, ang default po ng lahat is calendar year. No? Yung fiscal year, pag corporation siya, ina-apply pa din yan sa SEC. No? Section 44, period in which items of gross income included. No? Kaya nga may period tayo na sinasabi dito accounting period. And one taxable period is 12 months. No? So, period in which items of gross income included, the amount of all items of gross income shall be included in the gross income for the taxable year. No? So, lahat ng items ng gross income kasama sa income for the taxable year. No? In which received by the taxpayer. Kaya yung iba na, ma'am, yung certificate of withholding namin, di pa nabigay, last year pa. Pwede ba ngayon na lang namin isama sa ngayong year na to? Of course not. Why? Kasi, ano sabi dito? The gross income for the taxable year in which received by the taxpayer. So, kung kailan mo siya na-receive, doon mo siya report, no, in your taxable year. No? Unless under methods of accounting permitted under Section 43, any such amounts are to be properly accounted for as of a different period. Yun na yung mga deferred, no? At saka meron tayong video on accounting for income taxes. No? So, tingnan ninyo dyan kung kailan na pwede mo i-defer yung recognition ng income. In the case of the death of a taxpayer, there shall be included in computing taxable income for the taxable period in which falls the date of his death. No? Okay, so ano yung taxable income for the taxable period na namatay siya? The amounts accrued up to the date of his death, if not otherwise properly includable in respect of such period or a prior period. So, halimbawa, yung negosyante, namatay siya ng July, no? Or namatay siya halimbawa ng August. So, ano yung i-report doon sa individual income tax niya? Yung January to August as individual. Ano naman yung, since the business still continue, hindi pa na dissolved, no? Hindi pa nabayaran yung estate tax. From the date of death niya ng July, kung anong date man yun, up to December, magpa-file na ng income naman yung kanyang estate, no? Under the estate of, no? So, ibang tin na yun. No? May mga questions tayo sa YouTube na, ano yung gagamitin nung namatay kung hindi na yan, pwede palang gamitin yung tin nung buhay pa siya. The BIR will issue a new tax identification number for the decedent, no? So, yun na yung gagamitin. And, halimbawa, namatay siya nga ng hanggang August. So, pinagpatuloy pa ng mga anak niya yung negosyo. So, magpa-file pa sila ng income tax return for the estate of, no? Comes December, the ending taxable year, no? So, magpa-file pa sila. Okay. Section 45, period for which deductions and credits taken. No? Okay. The deductions provided for in this title shall be taken for the taxable year in which paid or accrued or paid or incurred. No? So, dependent upon the method of accounting, upon the basis of which the net income is computed, unless in order to clearly reflect the income, the deduction should be taken as of a different period. No? In the case of the death of a taxpayer, there shall be allowed as deductions for the taxable period in which falls the date of his death, amounts accrued up to the date of this death, if not otherwise properly allowable in respect of such period or a prior period. So, yung mga deductions, no? Entitled pa rin siya. Kahit namatay na siya, yung estate niya, entitled pa rin sa deductions, no? Section 46, change of accounting period. So, ano yung accounting period natin? Fiscal or calendar, no? If a taxpayer other than an individual changes his accounting period from fiscal year to calendar year, or from calendar year to fiscal year, or from one fiscal year to another, the net income will, with the approval of the commissioner, be computed on the basis of such new accounting period, subject to the provisions of Section 47. Ano yung Section 47? Final or adjustment returns for a period of less than 12 months. So, anong tawag doon? Short period return. No? Bakit short period return yon? Kasi ang isang taxable period is 12 months. Hindi siya umabot ng 12 months. Kaya ang tawag sa kanya, short period return. Okay. Section 47, the final or adjustment returns for a period of less than 12 months. No? So letter A, returns for short period resulting from change of accounting period. No? So short period resulting from change of accounting period. No? So if a taxable, kaya nga siya nag-file ng short period returns kasi may change ng accounting period. So if a taxpayer other than an individual with the approval of the commissioner, no, changes the basis of computing net income from fiscal year to calendar year, a separate final or adjustment return shall be made for the period between the close of the last fiscal year for which return was made and the following December 31. If the change is from calendar year to fiscal year, a separate final or adjustment return shall be made for the period between the close of the last calendar year for which the return was made and the date designated as the close of the fiscal year. No? So if the change is from one fiscal year to another fiscal year, then a separate final or adjustment return shall be made for the period between the close of the former fiscal year and the date designated as the close of the new fiscal year. No? So yun yung short period return. No? So income computed on basis of short period, where a separate final or adjustment return is made under subsection A on account of a change in the accounting period, and in all other cases where a separate final or adjustment return is required or permitted by rules and regulations, upon recommendation of the commissioner to be made for a fractional part of a year, then the income shall be computed on the basis of the period to which separate final or adjustment return is made. No? Ano yung sinasabi dito na separate final or adjustment return is made? Yung final return, yun talaga yung sa deadline na dun sa annual income tax return. No? Section 48, accounting for long-term contracts. No? So, nandito na yung accounting for long-term contracts. Ito yung based on gross receipts. No? Ito yung income nila parang cash basis. No? Okay. So, accounting for long-term contracts. No? May battery pa tayo, may sounds pa. No? So, feedback ha. So, Section 48, accounting for long-term contracts. No? Ano yung mga long-term contracts? Yung hindi siya natatapos ng 1 year lang. No? 2 years, 3 years, and then may kontrata yan. Income from long-term contracts shall be reported for tax purposes in the manner as provided in this section. As used herein, the term long-term contracts means building, installation, or construction contracts covering a period in excess of 1 year. No? Excess of 1 year. Persons whose gross income is derived in whole or in part from such contracts shall report such income upon the basis of percentage of completion. No? So, halimbawa, since ang project niya is 3 years, so dapat matatapos niya 1/3, no? 33% per year. No? So, percentage of completion ang reporting ng income. Hindi yung minsan mo lang siya report, no? The return should be accompanied by a return certificate of architects or engineers showing the percentage of completion during the taxable year of the entire work performed under contract. No? So there should be deducted from such gross income all expenditures made during the taxable year on account of the contract. No? So account being taken of the material and supplies on hand at the beginning and end of the taxable period for use in connection with the work under the contract but not yet so applied. No? So if upon completion of a contract it is found that the taxable or net income arising therefrom has not been clearly reflected for any year or years, the Commissioner may permit or require an amended return. No? So, pwede ka mag-amend. Kulang yung ni-report mo. No? So, yun yung accounting for long-term contracts. No? Percentage of completion. And sometimes, hindi lang percentage of completion yan, no? What is in the contract? No? What is stated in the contract? The provisions of the contract sometimes will prevail. No? Especially kung yung percentage of completion is also provided in the contracts. So, Section 49 on installment basis. No? Ano naman tong installment basis? How are you going to report the income on an installment basis? Letter A, sales of dealers in personal property. Ito yung sa mga dealers. Ha? Under rules and regulations prescribed by the Secretary of Finance, upon recommendation of the Commissioner, a person who regularly sells or otherwise disposes of personal property on the installment plan may return as income therefrom in any taxable year that proportion of the installment payments actually received in that year which the gross profit realized or to be realized when payment is completed bears to the total contract price. No? Letter B, sales of realty and casual sales of personality. No? Personality yan. Yan, personality. Personality. No? Personality, ibig sabihin, personal property. So in the case of a casual sale or other casual disposition of personal property other than property of a kind, which would properly be included in the inventory of the taxpayer. No, so nasa inventory, meaning ordinary assets siya. If on hand at the close of the taxable year, for a price exceeding 1,000 pesos, o may price siya, or number 2, of a sale or other disposition of real property, if in either case the initial payments do not exceed 25%, no, of the selling price. The income may, under the rules and regulations prescribed by the Secretary of Finance, upon recommendation of the Commissioner, be returned on the basis and in the manner above prescribed. No? So in this section, as used in this section, the term initial payments means the payments received in cash or property. No? Yun yung sinasabi na initial payments. Kasi nga, casual sales siya. Received in cash or property other than evidence of indebtedness of the purchaser during the taxable period in which the sale or other disposition is made. No? So, yun yung sales of realty and casual sales of personality. No? Sales of real property considered as capital assets by individuals. So, ito na yung sales. No? An individual who sells or disposes of real property considered as capital assets and is otherwise qualified to report the gain therefrom under subsection B may pay the capital gains tax in installment under rules and regulations to be promulgated by the Secretary of Finance upon recommendation of the Commissioner. So, allowed po sila na magbayad ng installment on the capital gains. No? May certain limit. Just like for value-added tax purposes, the sale of real property considered on the installment, no? Sale is if the buyer during the taxable year paid at least a total of 25%. No? In that case, if the down payment during the total payments during the first year, during the initial year, no, exceed or 25%, then they are considered as deferred payment plan, no, sale on the deferred payment plan, and all the taxes that should be paid for that transactions should be paid at the time na during the year, no, hindi na siya considered na installment. Okay. Letter D, change from accrual to installment basis, no. If taxpayer entitled to the benefits of subsection A elects for any taxable year to report his taxable income on the installment basis, then in computing his income for the year of change or any subsequent year, amounts actually received during any such year on account of sales or other dispositions of property made in any prior year shall not be excluded. Kasi nag-change siya from accrual to installment basis. No? Section 50, ito na, yung transfer pricing law natin. So, nakarating na tayo dito, no? Allocation of income and deductions, kasi we're talking about the deductions, di ba? Ano ba tong allocation of income and deductions? Ito yung transfer pricing law in the Philippines, no? So, ano sabi dito? In the case of two or more organizations, trades or business, whether or not incorporated and whether or not organized in the Philippines, owned or controlled directly or indirectly by the same interest, then the commissioner is authorized to distribute. Tatlo yung pwede niyang gawin na distribute, apportion, allocate. No? Gross income or deductions between or among such organization, trade or business, if he determined that such distribution, apportionment, or allocation is necessary in order to prevent evasion of taxes. No? Kaya bakit niya yan ginawa? To prevent evasion of taxes. Ano ginawa ng commissioner? Distribute, apportion, allocate, no? The income and deductions. Okay. To prevent evasion of taxes or clearly to reflect the income of any such organization, trade, or business. No? So, yun po yung section 50. And then those are the provisions natin for the income tax. No? So, may question?
Wala ma'am, shoutout ulit ma'am. Kay Sir Ralph Rosario, sabi niya ma'am, thank you for the lecture. Tapos si Ma'am Maria Revoltar, thank you doon.
Welcome po, no? Kasi magna 9 o'clock na. Kasi sana umpisahan ko pa itong returns and payment of tax. Kaso lang, alanganin na tayo for the section 51, no? For the individual return. So, ano na lang ibigay ko sa inyo for the last 10 minutes, no? Gusto kong tapusin talaga siya hanggang 10 o'clock. Ang dami ating hindi na-discuss no? So, bigyan ko kayo ng overview dito sa Section 50, which is the transfer pricing law in the Philippines, no? Kasi very important po ito, no? Section 50, the allocation of income and deductions, is the wordings of these provisions. Ito yung in the case of two or more organizations, the same wordings of Section 482 of the Internal Revenue Code of the United States. Our taxation law are mostly patterned from the law of the United States, no, sa taxation. No? And this Section 50, bakit siya very important? Kasi ito po yung transfer pricing. Ano bang ibig sabihin ng transfer pricing? Ito yung basis ng transfer pricing. So ano ba yung transfer pricing? Transfer pricing is the pricing of goods and services transferred within the organization or between the related parties. No? At ano yung pinaka-importante sa transfer pricing? Transfer pricing adopts the arm's length principle. And what is the arm's length principle? The arm's length principle is the internationally accepted principles that requires that independent party transactions, the related party transactions should be comparable or similar to that of the independent party transactions. Why? Because for the advocates of this arm's length principle, the true transactions are that of the independent party. So why is it that the related party transaction should conform with the independent transactions? Because the related party transactions has the element of control. No? They don't adopt the true price of goods and services because the other party is dictated, the other party is under control of the other entity, no? Which is the group. No? So yung may mga subsidiaries, sino ang may undue influence sa subsidiary? Of course, the principal or the head office. No? sino naman yung may undue influence over the investee? Bawa, corporation ka, then you are owned 90% ng isang company or ng isang individual. Of course, controlled ka, no? In terms of policy making, lahat ng decision making, you are controlled by the investor. Why? Because the investor also wanted to protect his or its interest in the business. No? May question?
Ma'am, may question si Ma'am Ferreira, ma'am.
Okay.
Sabi niya, ma'am, capital assets and ordinary assets are often used in this discussion. Kindly explain or differentiate these two.
Okay. So ano po yung sinasabi natin na capital assets? Capital assets are assets held by the company, no, for investment purposes. So nasaan? Pag tiningnan mo yung balance sheet mo, nasaan yung capital assets? Nasa property, plant, and equipment, no? Bakit? Kasi hindi mo siya ginagamit, hindi mo siya for sale, no? Nandoon siya. Nasaan naman yung ordinary assets? If you try to look at the balance sheet, ito yung ordinary assets nasa inventories mo. Bakit? Ordinary asset mo siya kasi ito yung binebenta mo, no? So, ano ba yung inventory when it comes to manufacture of goods? Ano ba yung nasa inventory ng manufacturing companies? Yung kanyang raw materials, goods in process, and then finished goods, no? If yung construction companies naman, ano yung nasa inventories niya? Ito yung mga goods niya na materials niya for the construction, no? So ano naman yung nasa inventories ng real estate business, no? Yung nandun sa inventory naman niya yung house and lot, no? Na binibenta niya in the ordinary course of business. Pag sinabi natin na ordinary assets, in the ordinary course of business of the taxpayer. Kaya ordinary assets siya. That is held for sale. Pag capital assets, nandoon lang, held for investment or ownership niya, pero not used in business. Nandoon lang sa hinuhold lang niya. No? So, may iba-ibang treatment kasi yan. Kasi, pag binenta mo, yung capital assets mo, subject to capital gains tax. Why subject to capital gains tax? Kasi capital assets siya eh, hindi siya nagmo-move eh. No? So, one time lang mo lang talaga siya ginalaw. Kaya capital assets. How about the ordinary assets? Hindi siya kasi gumagalaw ito, binibenta mo siya eh, no? So, since ordinary assets siya, anong babayaran mo? Not the capital gains tax, not the final tax, but the creditable withholding tax. So, pag sinabi mong expanded withholding tax, ito yung hindi mo siya babayaran ng capital gains kasi binenta mo siya. Ang bayad mo doon, creditable withholding tax. Anong gagawin mo? The creditable withholding tax, isama mo siya ngayon doon sa pag-file mo ng income tax return. So, nandoon yung sale mo, less the cost of that sale, and then the net gain, no, ng proceeds mo sa pagbenta mo ng ordinary assets mo. And then that would be subjected to capital gains tax, no? So, subjected to income tax, no? Hindi na siya capital gains tax ang tawag doon kasi ang capital gains doon lang sa capital assets. Pero pag ordinary assets na, purely income tax na lang siya, no? Kaya ka may certificate of withholding. Why? Because the proceeds of the sale of the ordinary assets should be reported in your income tax return, and then you claim deductions, and then the net income should be added also to your net income in your income statement. But for capital assets, since hindi na siya subject to final tax na siya, hindi mo na i-declare, hindi mo na isama pag-file mo ng income tax return mo. No? So, hindi siya sa ordinary business. So, okay?
Thank you daw po.
So, yun yung pagkakaiba ng capital gains. Capital assets, subject to capital gains tax. Ordinary assets naman, subject to creditable withholding tax as income tax. No? Okay. So, going back to our discussion on Section 50, this Section 50 is very important. No? Kung napapansin ninyo yung mga issues about ABS-CBN on the transfer pricing, so dito yan nanggagaling sa Section 50. But of course, this Section 50, meron na itong mga implementing regulations, no? So for purposes of this Section 50, we already have our Revenue Regulations 2-2013, dated January 2013, which is the transfer pricing regulations in the Philippines. At yung basis known is Section 50 of this National Internal Revenue Code. And aside from that, ano pa yung mga sunod-sunod na mga regulations also related to this Section 50? Yung current na ngayon na we have Revenue Regulations 19-2020, which requires that companies with related party transactions should fill out BIR Form 1709, 3 pages po yan, and then attach the documentation requirements on the transactions of the related party transactions. So ang tawag po doon, transfer pricing documentations. If the contracts, if the documentation that you have in your related parties are so voluminous, then the BIR allows that you reproduce those documents in soft copy and then record it in a DVD-R and then submit it to the BIR as an attachment to your annual income tax return. So, ganyan po yung dito sa Section 50. No? Section 50 is a very sophisticated provision. No? Saka this is a very powerful provisions. No? Sa buong mundo, ito yung kinatatakutan ng mga gumagawa ng scheme in taxation or yung mga tax evaders. Dito po sila natatakot sa Section 50. Why? Kasi full yung authority dito ng commissioner na pwede niyang i-assess. No? Ano sabi niya dito? Appropriate, allocate, distribute. No? Or apportion, allocate, or distribute. No? Income or deductions. Ano yung income and deductions? When you understate income, you lower the taxable base. Why? Kasi na-understate mo yung income, bababa yung taxable income mo, bababa yung tax mo. In-overclaim mo naman yung deductions, nilakihan mo naman yung deductions. Since it is a deduction to the gross income, so binabaan mo rin yung net taxable income mo. Anong effect? Yung income tax mo also mababa. No? So, iyan yung purpose ng Section 50, the allocation of income and deductions by the commissioner. At ano yung purpose? To prevent evasion of taxes. No? Or clearly to reflect the income of any such organization, trade, or business. Bakit reflect the income of organization, trade, or business? In order that the government can collect the, the income due on that organization, trade, or business. No? So, yun po yung ating Section 50. And I thank all those viewers po natin, yung mga ka-YouTubers natin on this live streaming. And we are doing this every Tuesday and Thursday, no? 8 o'clock in the evening hanggang alas 10 po. No? Ginawa natin yan kasi sabi na nga natin, nasa bahay naman na yung mga tao, kahit nakahiga sila, pwede sila makinig. No? So it's very convenient. No? So with that, I would like to say thank you sa mga subscribers natin. No? And sa mga hindi pa nag-subscribe, please subscribe to our channel. And we promise to bring you more tax updates. And the purpose of our channel is for you to have a better tax compliance. So let's call it a night. Good day. Good night, everyone. No?